The late 1980s and early 1990s saw a boom in the American comic book industry. For Marvel and DC, this meant an expanding on their line, publishing dozens of new comic books. It meant higher, more recognizable profiles for the artists and writers of those books. It meant more chances at animation and film projects, which brought in additional merchandising and licensing opportunities. It also meant that more people wanted in, and that meant an explosion of new companies. Image Comics is the most successful and perhaps the most well-known out of all of them, but there were others. Companies like Wildstorm, Awesome Comics, Eclipse Comics, Caliber, Comico, Defiant Comics, and Malibu Comics were all founded, made their mark on the industry, and unfortunately died. All of them had an impact, either launching the careers of individual creators, creating groundbreaking new characters, or experimenting with just how comic books told a story. Among those is today's focus, Milestone Comics. To put it simply, Milestone Comics was a company founded by Black comic book creators looking to tell stories that reflected their experiences and perspectives. Men like Dwayne McDuffie, Dennis Cowan, Michael Davis, Derek T. Dingle, and Christopher Priest had worked at Marvel and DC for years on and off, but often found themselves, and Black characters, sidelined. So they said, screw that, we're going to make our own comics! And they succeeded. My name is Ben, and this is episode 22.1 of Milestone Returns. Milestone, for the record, did more than tell stories featuring just Black superheroes. The creative teams made a point of including LGBT plus people in their stories, like the transgender Masquerade or gay male Fade in Blood Syndicate, something that bigger companies were very reluctant to do at the time. Remember, this is the mid-90s. They also made sure to put female characters front and center of their comics, most notably with the character Rocket from the comic book Icon, and gave them their own sense of agency. Milestone's mission was to improve representation in the world of comic books, and they do it broadly, and they do it well. As part of that concept, Milestone developed a new method for coloring comics. There is no single skin tone for any race on the planet Earth, and if representation was going to be front and center of their publishing initiative, then they needed to make sure that those characters looked right. After a page was finished being drawn, Milestone would then print those pages off, and they would all be hand-colored. This often included new techniques like using dyes, watercolors, and colored pencils in order to finish the pages. This is a time period when the rest of the industry was turning to computer coloring, and I would like to note that they generally did it poorly, so as far as I'm concerned, this is a real ballsy artistic move. Despite helping with the early planning for Milestone Media, planned editor-in-chief and author Christopher Priest ultimately had to leave the company before it was even started. This didn't keep the others from pushing forward, though. Milestone Media launched in 1993 with 4 comic book titles: Blood Syndicate, Hardware, Icon, and Static. All of these books existed within a shared space, referred to internally as the Dakotaverse. This is a nod to the setting of most of their comics, a Midwestern city called Dakota. In the original volume, there was a single inciting incident, the Big Bang, that gifted people all across Dakota with superpowers. Some of them became superheroes, some became supervillains, and some of them just tried to get on with their lives. After a year of publishing, Milestone had its first crossover, called Shadow War, which then created 2 more titles called Shadow Cabinet and Zombie, but with an X in place of a Z. In 1994, Milestone crossed over with DC, an event called Worlds Collide, a rare intercompany crossover, kind of thing that I love. How was something like that possible, you ask? Well, strangely, Milestone's comics were distributed by DC Comics, but not owned. DC had no control over editorial direction, the writing, the artwork, They published the books, and they distributed the books, which helped give Milestone a steady base from which to create their artwork, while other, newer publishers still had to figure out their publishing methods. Despite the talent creating their books and their forward-thinking writing, Milestone still had quite a few hurdles to overcome. As I mentioned before, there were a lot of companies competing for the comic-buying audience's attention, and Marvel and DC were publishing more books than they ever had before, and Milestone could be easy to overlook. That extensive coloring process that I mentioned earlier, that extra work cost money, which meant that Milestone's books cost more than a lot of other titles on the shelves as well. And, awkwardly, there was the race issue. Retailers and comic fans alike looked at Milestone's line and saw black comics being made for black fans, and they just didn't pick the books up. In 1995 and 96, Milestone began to cancel their lesser-selling titles. They launched a new team book called Heroes, which featured Static and their more popular B characters, but the book never found an audience, and it was soon canceled. Eventually, as sales continued to decline, Milestone closed down its publishing line in 1997 and focused instead on licensing their concepts out, which led to the creation of the Static Shock cartoon. This is how I learned of Milestone, if only tangentially. Static Shock launched on the WB in 2000 and would go on to run for 4 years. For myself, Static Shock was one of those cartoons that I would pretend I didn't watch, but secretly enjoyed. I had no idea about Static's background, but at the very least, I knew that he was not a Marvel character. And if the cartoon wasn't Marvel, well, I'm sorry, it just couldn't be good. This is obviously untrue, but I was just a dumb idiot back then. I mean, I'm still a dumb idiot now, but I am slightly less of a dumb idiot. Anyways, the Static Shock cartoon was pretty successful, especially for a comic book character who wasn't from Marvel or DC, and especially for one who didn't even have an ongoing comic at the time that the cartoon was made. It had been 3 years since Static Shock had a comic book. The show garnered praise for its portrayal of issues facing teenagers, including racism, bullying, gang violence, school violence, and gun usage. It did get quite a bit of criticism for being fairly by the book, and for some rather lackluster animation, but when you were jonesing for a superhero cartoon in the early 2000s, you know what? It would hit the spot. Notably, behind the scenes, it was working on Static Shock that introduced Dwayne McDuffie, one of Milestone's founders, to the world of animation. The work here led to him being hired for other DC cartoons like Justice League, its sequel, Justice League Unlimited, Teen Titans, and Ben 10 Alien Force, which isn't really a comic book property, but it is definitely comic book adjacent. Ben 10 was developed by Man of Action, a team that was made up of comic book writers and artists with the intent of developing new properties. So, like I said, it is definitely like a cousin property of comic book properties. Like it's definitely like off on the side, but it is there. Interest in the cartoon led to DC republishing the original 4 issues of Static in a new trade paperback called Trial by Fire in 2000. In the following year, 2001, Static got a brand new miniseries titled Rebirth of the Cool that ran for 5 issues. DC continued to flirt with the idea of the Milestone characters, most notably Static, as the years went on. Then author Jeff Johns tried to use Static during his run on Teen Titans, which started in 2003, but every time that he approached legal about it, they said that it just wasn't the time, he couldn't do it yet. In 2006, in Volume 2 of Justice League of America, issues 27 and 28, DC revealed that a number of Milestone characters had always existed in DC continuity, including big names like Icon, who is Milestone's conceptual counterpart for Superman, and Hardware, who is Milestone's conceptual counterpart for Iron Man. But the storyline didn't launch any new comics or new series or suddenly push Milestone into the limelight and they rose like a phoenix. It happened, and unfortunately, then it was over. It wasn't until 2008 that Static would be absorbed into the DC universe proper, making his first appearance in the miniseries Terror Titans. His story then jumped into the Teen Titans proper with issue 79 in 2010. So it took 7 years From Johns' first, "Hey, how about we have Static join the Teen Titans," thought to actualization. That boggles my ever-loved mind. Static is easily the longest-lasting character from Milestone, and to me, he should be a fairly easy character to write. He's your everyday guy with superpowers navigating life. He's Peter Parker, but black. This isn't rocket science. And Brian Michael Bendis would take that same basic idea, but make Miles Morales, who is really just Spider-Man, and everybody loves him. Way to blow it, DC. To be fair, though, Johns makes sure to mention that it was legal issues that prevented his usage of Static. Comic book contracts are always these mysterious, shadowy things, ill-defined and unexplainable to the general public. To the best of our knowledge, in order to use Milestone's characters, DC would very likely first need to seek approval from the copyright holders. And I'm assuming that they would either need to get that from Milestone's team's lawyers or the Milestone teams themselves, which I'm sure takes time and then discussions amongst them themselves. They would want to make sure that their characters are being well represented and that the stories being told align with how they want them portrayed. And if some of the owners didn't like an idea, then that negotiating and discussion would take even more time. So, while it is easy for me to complain that these characters and concepts did not get used often, it really isn't an easy thing for them to be used at all, at least back in those days. That struggle didn't stop there. 2011 was a rough year for Static. A new series was being planned for release, but when Milestone founder Dwayne McDuffie died in February of 2011, it was canceled. A very limited release one-shot was published in June of 2011, celebrating Static, McDuffie, and Milestone in general. Then, finally, in late 2011, DC relaunched Static as part of their big New 52 publishing initiative. Finally, his first new ongoing series in 14 years. The book wasn't very good, and was plagued with problems, changing authors by issue 7, and ultimately being cancelled with issue 8. And that was it for another long time. While we, as the audience, didn't see any moves happening behind the scenes, the Milestone Media Company was trying to pull together a concept and a plan for a relaunch. There were a few starts and stops along the way, but finally, in 2020, Milestone managed to come back. They launched with a one-shot entitled Milestone Returns, which set the stage for their line of titles. Rather than launching 3 ongoing series all at the same time, though, Milestone has chosen to package their books in seasons, and Season 1 consisted of 6 issues of Static, Icon and Rocket, and Hardware. At some point in my comic buying history, probably 10 years or so ago, I had thought about putting together a Milestone collection. It probably would have started as a collection of Static for reasons that I think are obvious by now, and mostly it's because Static worked in a way that no other Milestone character had. Of course, I would want to see where all that love comes from. And I know for a fact that when I started to explore the comic book worlds and companies outside of Marvel, that I saw a fair number of Milestone books in dollar bins. So come on, how hard would it be to put this collection together? Well, when I looked into it, Static had ran for a total of 45 issues, and they were not dollar books anymore. So I backed off. Buying Static would probably mean ultimately buying everything because, well, that's just how my addiction works. So if I couldn't buy it, then honestly, that was probably a good thing for everybody involved. But with this new relaunch, I now had a chance to get in on the ground floor. So let's break them down, shall we? The first story out of 2 is called The Big Bang, and it was written by Reginald Hudland with artwork by Dennis Cowan and Nicholas Draper-Ivey, Bill Sankiewicz, Chris Sotomayor, Chris Cross, Juan Castro, and Will Quintana. The story starts off in the streets of Dakota during the height of the Black Lives Matter protests. Police, or some form of military maybe, have already taken to the street. They're dressed in full body armor, are wearing gas masks, and lead a line of tanks and SUVs down the streets. Within one of the vehicles, we see men grabbing canisters of gas, commenting that this is the new stuff. It's supposed to be great. It is going to take those protesters down. Against them is a crowd of young people. They're predominantly black, but there are other skin tones in the crowd, so it's not all one group. They are wearing COVID masks and hold up homemade signs and banners. Nobody in the crowd in particular stands out, but somebody does narrate the scene. Whoever they are, they say that they aren't supposed to be here. Their parents warned them about how cops act in situations like these, but Frank and his crew threaten to beat up our narrator after school anyways. If they're going to risk their neck, they figure they better do it for a cause. One of the officers, who appears to be in charge, shouts for the crowd to turn around. They are to return to school or they will be arrested for truancy. A lone protester shouts for them to stop killing innocent people, and they will. The officer sneers. Fine. He orders his men to fire. Gassed canisters fly through the air and blanket the crowd. Everything turns to chaos. Our narrator remembers the sound of flesh and bone hitting concrete, but not much else. In the crowd, we see a white teenager's hair catch on fire. Another one, a young black man, starts sparking with electricity. One of the cops pauses. What was in that stuff? But one of his comrades tells him not to get soft now. They asked for this. As we look at the electric kid, a new set of narration bubbles take over. They identify the kid, Virgil, and the first word bubble belongs to Virgil's father, who asks what his son was even doing at the protest to begin with. His mom says that he was probably chasing some girl. His sister, Sharon, says that he was probably chased there by a bully. She tells us that Frank likes to demonstrate how cool he is by beating up on kids who aren't black enough, despite him being white in and of himself. The father sighs angrily. He knew that letting Virgil stop training would come back to bite them. He would be a green belt by now if his mom hadn't let him quit. Now look at him. But Mom doesn't reply. Instead, she asks who the girl is that Virgil is chasing. And Sharon helps us all out there too. That would be Frida. She is the one who invited him to the protest, and he even went to the protest knowing that Frank was going to be there too. From the bed, we see Virgil wake up and groggily ask his sister to stop telling everyone his business. His mom hugs him and his father crosses his arms. As soon as he is back up, he is going to resume his training. He is going to learn how to handle that bully. Bet. For the uninitiated, this is our introduction to young Virgil Hawkins, who will go on to be better known as Static. And it really works as an introduction. We know the obvious now. We see the family dynamics at play, we learn that Virgil has a bully problem and a crush, we see his own sense of heroism going to the protest to begin with, and we learn how he got his powers, the gas canisters the cops used, all in just 5 pages. That's some pretty floopin' good writing. There are a few problems with the writing, as much as I'm amazed at how much Hudlin was able to cram in here. Sharon, Virgil's sister, is basically a living tool of exposition, telling his parents, and us, what is going on with him. That isn't bad per se, but it doesn't give us much of a sense of who she is, or who Virgil is, or how he relates to these people that she's talking about. We get the basics, and just the basics. To be fair, this also establishes that Sharon is plugged into the school rumor mill, and possibly a confidant of Virgil. He clearly trusts her with this information, but not his parents, who appear to be clueless about both his bully and his crush. Dad is the authoritarian figure, of course. He relates to the world on threats and how to manage them. He wants to know why Virgil put himself into a dangerous situation, who the bully is, and he wants that dealt with. Mom, on the other hand, is the emotional one, more concerned with who Virgil is interested in than who he might have to fight. She's also the one who rushes forward to hug him, while Dad does not. Whatever has happened in Dad's past has left him a bit cold, a little closed off, while whoever Mom is, she is just glad that her child's alive. to me, reading this comic, that idea is especially potent, given that the Black Lives Matter protests were about police murdering black people. Her son could easily have been one of them. Thank God that he wasn't. But we end on a light note, with Virgil more concerned with his sister shutting up about his secrets than how he's doing. He has clearly kept these things from his parents, and he wants to keep it that way. That sense of privacy is more important to him than whatever happened during the protests. But this is also played lightly, and honestly, I feel like it's the first real bit of personality to show through for Virgil. I read that line, and I can perfectly hear Phil Lamar's voice from the Static Shock cartoon. That is an awesome thing to do. There are very few people who manage to capture another voice of a character when writing a comic book, and I do think that Hudlin really nails Virgil here. I do question the effectiveness of this scene for a brand new reader, though. While I haven't read any of Static's comics before, I did watch the cartoon, and of course I've done a bunch of reading about him and Milestone. I'm familiar with the basics of this concept, so these 5 pages acting as a brief promo work for me. But what if I didn't know this stuff? Would that scene be enough for you, dear listener, to start buying a whole new comic series of a character you maybe have never heard of? Or if you have heard of, it's just from the fact that he had a cartoon? I mean, I'm not really sure. All of our information's at the end, and while sure the character does get superpowers, we don't see any setup for him being a superhero here. We just get a lot of personal drama. Which I'm fine with. I like a character who's got a lot of stuff going on in their life, so I'm cool with it. I just don't know if these are the 5 pages I would have picked to set up and sell one of my most important characters in a franchise. I'm also torn on the update made to the Big Bang. The original Big Bang happened during a gang war. A bunch of rival gangs had gotten together, the police had gotten involved, something strange happened, and people started developing superpowers. Among them, of course, were gang members, which directly connects to one of Milestone's comics, The Blood Syndicate. Removing that gang connection cuts the Blood Syndicate a little bit off from this overall launch, which could make it end up feeling really disconnected from the rest of the publishing line. But we'll take a look when that get there. We're not worried about the Blood Syndicate right now. Let's just focus on where we're at, Ben. I do appreciate the update to the inciting incident becoming a Black Lives Matter protest, though. Marvel Comics has always made their name being the world outside your window, reflecting change in the world and adding a sense of realism to their fantasy concepts. Milestone doing the same grounds their stories in the same way and has that same effect. This feels real to me, even with a strange gas giving random people superpowers. Gang violence isn't as covered in modern society as it was back in the 1990s. I hesitate to say that gang violence has lessened, as I don't really have any experience with that or news articles in front of me about that. But the Black Lives Matter protests reached around the globe and reflect the experience of many black people in America, which is ultimately what Milestone set out to do. Overall, while I do have some problems with it, I do think that this is a solid opening scene, and I have probably spent way too long talking about it. We move on to Alva Industries, where we find Curtis Metcalf having lunch with some of his coworkers. The TV is turned to the news, as they somehow always are, and they're covering the disaster at the protest. Metcalf says that he is sure they're going to blame him for this. His coworker, a blonde woman, doesn't believe that for an instant. He told them that the gas was untested, that it wasn't ready for field use yet. It wasn't his fault. That warning was in an electronic document that is undoubtedly getting deleted as we speak, Metcalf replies. There is no way that the cops are going to take the blame, which means the gas's manufacturer, Alva Industries, that they need somebody to hold responsible who isn't in a position of power. And that's Curtis. He can see it now. Black kid lifted from the ghetto gets the chance of a lifetime and blows it by thinking that he's smarter than the rest of us, film at 11. He leaves work and crosses town. As he does, he receives a call in his car from Mr. Alva's secretary. They saw that he left work early, but Mr. Alva still wanted to talk to him. Curtis asks if they need to talk now, or is it something that they can do in the morning. The morning is fine. She hangs up, and he finishes his drive. He isn't stupid. Curtis knows that they're watching him. He knows that his house is under surveillance. That's why he's actually built a secret lab in the city. He pulls into a dilapidated building, going to his lab, and strips down to his skivvies. I'm honestly not exactly sure what he does here. We are shown him, I believe he's naked, and the energy effect just kind of covers up his butt for the most part. But he steps into, or through, maybe, a door that is crackling with orange energy. The coloring on it is actually really nice, but I'm not sure if he is passing through some kind of like high-tech security check, or if he is teleporting into the lab. He appears to stand in the orange energy effect, and as he does, a like black material manifests on him. It covers him from head to toe, leaving just his eyes, mouth, ears, and nose open. So it looks like he steps into this thing, and it puts this black clothing on him. Does he also teleport, or like how this relates to the lab? I don't know. The artwork's a little confusing here for me. As the process finishes, Curtis flexes an arm. And then there is a knock at the door.
"Dakota Police, open up!"
Curtis sneers. That was fast. They must have done a better job tracking him than he thought. The door suddenly explodes inward. Cops pour through, and they immediately start firing at him. Someone shouts that they know that he is armed, but he's just standing there. But now he is dressed differently. Blocky gray armor covers his torso, with rounded shoulder pads, gauntlets on his forearms, and some thick chains at his waist. He is wearing a helmet, but one that leaves his face open, outlined in red. Once they see that their bullets have no effect, the cops stop shooting. What is that? You didn't even give me a warning before you started shooting, Curtis says. Again, someone asks what that is, meaning the armor that he's wearing. Curtis, however, replies, "What? The blackness that protects me? Does it scare you? Because I haven't even started shooting back yet." Then he twists his arms out front, bringing them up and opening fire. Either he pulls his shots, or he misses intentionally, or he's a terrible shot, because the three cops literally just turn around and run away. There's not even like a strategic withdrawal here, they just run away. Curtis shouts after them, "Never, ever come around here no more." The story of Curtis Metcalf then spins off into his own comic book, called Hardware. This story doesn't work nearly as well for me as the static one, but I do have to admit that I like the basic concept here. The conspiracy aspect of a company blaming one of its employees instead of taking responsibility feels very real to me. The fact that they are going to choose to blame a black man for this disastrous turn of events perpetrated on mostly black people makes Alva Industries, which is owned and operated by a white guy who clearly didn't care about proper procedure of this experimental gas, look like they are an ally publicly. But really, this is an injustice on top of an injustice, and Curtis is the only one who sees it coming. A bit too late, but he does see it. So he bounces as soon as possible and gets his armor and weapons. I would bet that the meeting that Alva wanted to have with him would also have included the authorities. And when Curtis skipped it, Alva just sent the cops on to his next location. If you feel like Curtis expecting all of this is a bit hyper-intelligent and cynical, well, I would argue that you're right. But Curtis also tells us that he knows that Alva Industries is spying on him. They already don't trust him, and they went behind his back and against his wishes in selling that gas. So it isn't really a big leap to suspect Alva of some kind of foul play. We are also told, during his conversation with his coworkers, that Curtis is incredibly smart and one of the public faces of the company. So him being smart enough to see how Alva might react to the situation feels right, and he's a public enough face that arresting him might satiate public demands for justice. This particular story ends way more abruptly than Virgil's does, but I do feel like we get the basic idea. Alva Industries, who is a publicly known company and who is big enough to clearly develop weapons for the police, has turned their considerable resources on Curtis, and the cops want him too. This is a man with no superpowers, just his brain and a strong sense of will. And that's a pretty solid setup for a comic book. I don't really like Curtis, though. Yes, he is smart, and yes, he has been betrayed, but that means that we pretty much only get to see him as an angry defensive man in this story. All of which is understandable, but there isn't a lot of depth to his character here. He isn't funny, he isn't particularly close to any of his coworkers in that scene, we know nothing of his personal life or what he stands to lose if he is arrested, other than potentially his life. I certainly sympathize with Curtis in this scene, and I don't want to see him get caught, and I do want his name cleared, but I don't care for him as an individual like I did with Virgil in the opening scene by the end of his story. It's really interesting to me that Virgil's story is almost exclusively his personal life, and then, he happens to have superpowers, where Hardware's story is very much, here's all the superhero setup stuff you need, and his personal life can kind of go take a flying leap. There is also something strange to me about Curtis's voice. Curtis as a character is being written as super intelligent. He has caught the major corporation that has been spying on him. He is far-seeing enough that he has a fully built and well-stocked hidden lab, even if it's not as hidden as he thought it was. He's developed some kind of second skin body armor and a battle suit on top of that of some kind. When Curtis talks to his coworkers, he uses a very formal way of speech, using full sentences and pretty much no slang at all. But then, when he narrates and we're inside of his head, he sounds much more relaxed. He uses a lot more slang, too. When Curtis runs the cops off, he doesn't tell them to never ever come back. He says, quote, "Don't never ever come back here," end quote. It's likely that Curtis is code switching, which is a conversational tool that people use. For example, I talk to my parents differently than how I talk to my wife, and I talk differently to my wife than I do my friends. We all do this, but for non-white people, code switching can be an essential and, in some situations, life-saving tool. Curtis, as a human being, has grown up inside Alva Industries, meaning that he has had to fit in with the educated, rich white people that likely surrounded him during that time period. So he has adopted a more formal, more respectful tone around them. But in his head, he is much more relaxed, more himself, and so he sounds different to me reading that. When Alva and the cops come after him, Curtis no longer feels a need to be respectful, so he uses more slang in confronting them. In my initial read of this scene, I thought that Curtis was just being lazily written as a black stereotype, especially since he's just angry in this scene. He fits the character angry black man box perfectly. But upon closer inspection, I actually think that this is some really careful character work. The fact that this is also demonstrated after he suits up really lends credence to my argument, in my opinion. The first thing that we see Curtis do once he gets to the lab is he puts on that second skin, and it's black. Not the dark brown that his natural skin tone is. I am talking like Venom symbiote levels of blackness. And when he confronts the cops, it is this level of his skin that he is referring to, asking if they are scared of his blackness. This has two meanings. Curtis is referencing his race as a black man, but he is also referencing the armor that he has put on. He is literally weaponizing blackness against the authorities, both as a defensive skin tone as well as verbal barbs, symbolizing his return fire. This is why his helmet doesn't cover his face as well, because Curtis doesn't need to hide who he is. He is a wrongfully accused black man facing down some really big enemies. And if you remove the armor from the story, that is just a real-world story right there. This kind of thing has happened in the real world, and unfortunately, it is probably going to happen again, unless we heed the warnings of stories such as this. This bit of the comic was drawn by Dennis Cowan and inked by Bill Sankiewicz, and has colors by Chris Sotomayor, and I gotta say, I really like how this section of the comic looks. The line work is very rough feeling, with sketchy black lines and heavy darks for a lot of the backgrounds. The colors, though, are bright and vibrant, with nice highlights when bright lights or gunfire breaks out. That is really nice looking. But I gotta say, as much as I do enjoy the artwork here, the Hardware armor looks stupid as hell to me. It is blocky and clunky. The guns on his forearms literally look like they're duct taped down. It does not look like a high-tech piece of machinery at all. It looks like a bad football uniform, to be honest, and it completely covers the awesome metaphor that is the black second skin armor. It is possible, though, that that's the idea. That Curtis is just grabbing whatever tech and tools he has in his lab, strapping them to his body as fast as he can, and then he just has to go because the cops show up. There's no time for miniaturization or well-thought-out designs or for concept artists to really nail this thing so it can sell toys, right? If we move forward in this story and see Curtis upgrade this suit, maybe that'll polish it up and we'll see a better-looking second version, and I'll be more than happy. But if this is it, I gotta say, I'm not a fan. To play off an Obadiah Stane quote, Tony Stark made a better-looking suit in a cave with a box of scraps. And Curtis Metcalf is clearly Milestone's take on the idea of Tony Stark. We jump briefly to a hospital in Dakota where we find a vlogger named Darius with his camera on a selfie stick. Darius is literally a living source of exposition, exposing how the kids who have been affected by the gas are being treated. Or, as is the case, mistreated. He then moves on to the people who couldn't afford to stay at a hospital at all. We meet two young men who are so changed that they have either been kicked out of their homes, one of them looks like a demon, or because they chose to leave. One of them has, super acidic stomach acid, and he was just kind of continuously puking and melting the house down. These two guys are planning to take care of themselves from here on out. The cops have always treated them like monsters anyways, and it's not like there are any jobs to be had in the city, so they might as well just take what they want. And they're being encouraged to by an OG named Holocaust. One of the guys, the demon, is like, dude, you shouldn't even be saying his name. And Acid Puke is like, dude, don't even worry about it. It's not like he's gonna know. So now we are being shown the flip of Virgil's story. Not everybody in the Big Bang has gotten powers and stayed handsome, or gotten to keep their families like Virgil did, or copes with it well. Hudlin is setting up a fertile ground for new villains, Bang Babies, as they are called, with nowhere to go but the streets. This will lead them to a new power, Holocaust, who has ties back to the OG Milestone and another comic that I mentioned earlier called Blood Syndicate. We don't see him here, but we know that he's talking to people, he's recruiting kids off the street, and he doesn't like his name being spread. So, good setup. We then return to Virgil and see him continue with his recovery. His own powers manifest initially as electricity, and at first, they do so in surprising times. We are shown him taking a poop, and he shorts out the house. You really don't want to strain Virgil. That is how you get hemorrhoids. He practices with his powers, though, learning to channel his anger into a form of control. Every insult, every shoulder check in the hallway, every snide remark that he's gotten in his life, it just helps him refine that control. He's no Magneto, but he can have change dance in his palm. And he isn't shorting out the house anymore, so save on the electricity bills. As Virgil walks through the streets, memorials placed by grieving families remind him of the march. In a flashback, we see Frida invite him, but we also see Frank tease him about it, claiming that the Oreo is only doing it to get in Frida's pants. Frank is a pale guy. I'm pale, and Frank is even paler than I am, with short red hair. And Frida's friend tells Frank to shut up. He smiles and says, quote, "Quiet slut," end quote. So Virgil does the right thing in my opinion, and he punches him in the face. The pair of them start to go at it, actively fighting now, and more people jump in to support either side of the fight. As the violence spreads through the marching crowd, someone calls the cops and reports a riot, and we know what happens from there. If you're thinking that scene doesn't match up with what we were shown at the start of this comic, you're absolutely right. All we see in the opening scene is a peaceful march, the cops respond with tanks and gas, and things go bad. Really bad. Could this moment between Virgil and Frank have been happening somewhere, and we just weren't shown it at the start of the comic? I mean, yeah, I suppose it could have, but why wouldn't you show it? Why not just open the comic with this scene, play up to the gas attack, and then you could switch to Curtis Metcalf, and after his scene, you jump to Virgil in the hospital and then his return to school. It's easy, it flows better, and the timing would make a lot more sense than what we just got here. Otherwise, it feels like Hudlin is trying to portray the Black Lives Matter protests as 100% peaceful and that the gas attack isn't justified. It doesn't feel like this is what happened, it feels like this is propaganda. But if there is a massive riot started by Virgil and Frank fighting, then the use of tear gas feels much more justified. And I'll admit, even in reality, the Black Lives Matter marches had peaceful ones and riotous ones, so it does happen. But it looks like Hudlin is saying that Virgil and Frank's fight is what led to the cops and the gas attack. If anything, it really feels like these two scenes were written by different people and produced by different artists. Our original opening scene had people wearing masks because of COVID-19, which is contemporary to the Black Lives Matter's protests. But then you watch this scene with Virgil and Frank, and nobody has a mask on. I could understand if the comic chose not to put anybody in a mask anyways, just because it's easier and you don't want to tie all of your comic and your universe to events in reality. Sometimes you don't. I understand that. But in our first scene, we are shown characters doing this march with masks on. And then if this fight was happening in that scene, these characters should have masks on. We see, in our initial scene, the last person that we see is Virgil crackling with electricity, and he has a COVID mask on. Here, in this scene, he never has one on at all. It feels like this was produced either by a completely different team or at a completely different time from the opening book, and it really just kind of frustrates me. We then return to reality, and Virgil returns to school, hoping for a sense of normalcy. But the first thing that he sees upon entering the building is Frank leaning on a reluctant girl. He thinks that she is hot, almost as hot as him. And then he lights on fire, demonstrating his new powers. His flirting is interrupted, though, as one of his, friends, I guess, points out Virgil's arrival. Oh, nice, he says, beelining it to Virgil. He calls himself Hotstreak now, and he is eager to finish the beating that they started at the march. But Virgil's powers lift him into the air, crackling with purple electricity, and he drops down right in front of Frank. He blasts him with electricity, knocking him to the ground. And then he doesn't stop. All of his anger pours out of him, all of his hate for this bully. One of Frank's friends tells Virgil to stop. He is killing him. And Virgil has to ask himself, is he? He's never used his powers on a person before. And honestly, even if he is killing him, doesn't Frank deserve it? After all that he has done. Other students in the hallways even shout for him to do it. Fry him. But Virgil stops. He's sure that Frank does deserve it. But Virgil won't be the one to do it. These powers have changed him, yes, but he needs to decide what that means. What they're going to change him into. And it's not going to change him into a killer. Virgil starts to walk away, leaving a smoking, but alive, Frank on the floor. A security guard finally notices the crowd that had gathered and runs in, shouting to know what's going on here. And no one says anything. Even Frank. Still smoking, Frank stands up and he says that he slipped. Virgil smiles. No problems here, officer. This is your fairly standard bully hero kind of confrontation, just with superpowers added in, and it doesn't do a lot for me. I'm a bit annoyed that this time, Virgil did not try to stop Frank from hitting on that girl. One of Frank's friends points out Virgil, and then he just switches targets like he can only have one focus at a time. It makes Virgil feel much more passive in his heroic journey, but I can understand his reluctance. After all, Virgil isn't a hero. Yet. But this scene and his decision to spare Frank hint that Virgil has bigger things in mind than just punishing people. We then... Wow, alright, this is a scene change. We then join Icon and Rocket in their supersonic jet over the jungles of Colombia. Icon, by the way, is a black man with no pupils in a red and green supersuit with a cape. His hair is worn very short. He's got your nice classic square jaw superhero kind of face. In comic shorthand, Icon is Milestone's Superman. Rocket, on the other hand, is a teenage girl with red goggles, wavy short-cut hair, and a blue and black outfit. She does have, additionally, on a leather jacket, like a 90s-era rogue used to wear. I love that kind of look. Rocket narrates the scene for us, and her boxes are designed to look like notebook paper, highlighting the fact that Rocket is still young and in school. She's actually skipping school to go on this mission. But she also figures that she's going to learn more by actually visiting Columbia than just reading about it. Rocket also tells us that Icon is a 200-plus years old alien who shares a neighborhood with her. She asked him to help clean up the drug dealers from their hood, and they have. But now, he wants to take things to the source. Rocket drops from the ship like a bomb and then races into the small base where the cocaine is being refined. Somehow, Rocket is able to absorb the kinetic energy and channel it into her punches. So all of the bullets that hit her just make her stronger, and when she hits the stone wall surrounding their base, boom, it explodes. Icon swoops in next. His telekinesis peels off the roof. Eye blasts burn the cocaine. Another round of telekinesis grabs the assault rifles that the dealers aim at them, and Icon just floats there, his eyes glowing menacingly. This isn't about just destroying the coke. This is about terrifying the men producing it, cowing them into never touching the stuff again. With that done, the pair get tacos. Icon says that he has had tacos from many countries and all over the world, but he likes the ones here best. Rocket agrees with that statement. It sure beats whatever they serve at Dakota High, let me tell you. Icon then reminds her to call her mom to let her know that she is safe and that the mission was a success. Rocket grumbles about having to do so, but she does pull out her phone. And when she does, her jaw drops. They need to get back to Dakota. There have been protests, cops attacking peaceful protesters, kids mutating in the streets. They gotta get back now. Icon pulls up his own information feeds, including ones from inside the police department. He agrees that they need to return. Sure, Rocket then says with a smile, as soon as I finish my taco and call my mama. We get quite a bit of information from this section. Hudlin gives us the basic premise of this duo. Icon is the power, Rocket is the motivation, and they are working together to destroy the drug trade. That is a solid basic idea, and I'm here for it. Icon is very much written as a stiff, emotionally closed off, and analytical man. But he does have some level of emotional awareness. Rocket's narration tells us that when they are on a mission and she is skipping school, she has to have non-superpowered experiences in these other countries. Icon wants her to learn. He wants her to experience the world and be a better person, and he wants to nurture her desire to make things better for everyone. He is also the one who reminds her to call her mom, showing an emotional awareness that Rocket, who is caught up in how cool all of this stuff is, doesn't quite have yet. Rocket is a contrast to everything about Icon. She is passion, she is joy, she is the one who goes into these missions with a song in her heart and an eagerness to punch people in the face. Rocket is the one who got Icon into this, but he is also clearly the one looking out for the both of them. Despite Rocket being the one who motivated Icon, she does know how to step back and let him take the lead when they are in the field, and I really like that bit of balance. She is so caught up in the superhero stuff that she does forget to call her mom, a move that I certainly sympathize with, and so the pairing of these two works really well, and I really like the banter of this scene. We even get a nice, smaller, more compact example of this in the story itself, in how the pair of them get their information. When Rocket brings up the news in Dakota, Icon asks if she is using her illegitimate news sources, which my guess would be our Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, the news sources of the people, where there's almost no fact-checking or vetting at all. Rocket scoffs at his derision, countering that his traditional news sources are just controlled by rich a-holes and can't be trusted either. Rocket is the now, eager to make change regardless of who wants it and what it disrupts, while Icon has deeper roots and trusts what he knows. Neither of them, honestly, are wrong in their opinions, and neither of them, honestly, are right either. Like the characters themselves, they need to work together in order to be effective. I don't know if it's coming through in my, because I'm trying to be really analytical here, but like out of all the portions of this comic, I gotta say, I kind of like these two best. The artwork in this scene is also a little bit more polished, reflecting the more traditional superhero vibe that this team is meant to evoke. We then end in an undisclosed location. The two guys that Darius interviewed earlier, Vomit Guy and Devilman, go to a warehouse and join a crowd as a large, muscular black man with dreadlocks talks to them. All of them have been pushed down, ignored, stepped on, or abused their whole lives, he says. Hell, they've been trying to break us for 400 years, and they haven't done it yet. And now, they never will. We have power now, and they can't take it away. They are an army, connected not by family ties, but by blood. And soon, once they take what is owed to them, this whole city is gonna belong to them. The crowd chants this guy's name. Holocaust. And from there, we are promised that everything that we have seen will spread out into the Milestone Universe's 3 initial launch titles: Static, Icon and Rocket, and Hardware. A bit of a spoiler alert, having now read the entirety of Milestone's first wave of titles, I can definitely say that Holocaust doesn't appear again. I don't know how big a character this guy was supposed to be, or how big he was in the OG Milestone. Some quick research reveals that Holocaust did get his own 5-issue miniseries, so clearly the company did have some faith in him to sell comics. But they're also clearly setting him up as this voice of the street kind of character. Is he doing so for his own aggrandizement? Does he just want power or money or fame? We don't really know yet. Maybe he actually wants to help these disenfranchised kids whose lives have been uprooted, upended, and quite possibly ruined. Again, I don't know. It is hard to tell from this scene. It does feel like this is kind of a villainous bit of the story, given that he's talking about taking the city by force. That feels very much like a bad thing for the people who live there. But it is a really good speech, and Holocaust cuts an intimidating figure. But I honestly don't like that he gets so much focus here for a guy that we're not going to see again for months. Holocaust won't appear again until the Blood Syndicate comic drops, and that is going to be months from the point where this issue came out. Overall, though, I did really enjoy this half of the one-shot. I think that it does a pretty good job presenting snapshots of our leading titles, Static, Hardware, Icon, and Rocket, and to some degree Holocaust. I think all of their stories are interesting and compelling, even if they are in different ways. I like that the artwork changes for each character too, which helps establish the tone of them better. Static's artwork is vaguely animated looking, aiming for a younger audience. There's a part of me that wants to say it's anime/manga inspired, but it really doesn't connect to anything. If you were to ask me what anime or manga inspired them, I wouldn't be able to give you one specifically. It just looks animated, bright, cartoony. The artwork's a little bit looser, but it does fit really well. Hardware's artwork is more sketchy and rough, playing into the idea that Curtis is on the run, life is hard, and nothing makes sense anymore. Icon and Rocket's artwork is cleaner and brighter, evoking that classic superhero feel that I mentioned earlier. I think this is a really cool and intelligent way of kind of giving you a taste, not just of the characters, but this is what the comic's going to look like if you do continue to buy these things as well. You're not just getting Jim Lee drawing an entire one-shot for one issue, and then you pick up the next comic book in the line, and it's something completely different. I do question how well this one-shot would sell to a reader who was completely ignorant about Milestone, though. It is obviously called Milestone Returns, so clearly Milestone existed at one point before this issue. Would a new reader really see this sitting on a shelf and go, oh, I'm not familiar with this idea and what it was, but it clearly existed once before and it is coming back now, I better check it out? I mean, I'm a reader who likes to do my research. My desire to look into the back matter is a strong selling point for any comic book that I've been interested in. I want to compare and contrast what came before with what's happening now. I want to get in on the ground floor of these things. But what if you're someone who was born in 2000 and you saw this and you've never heard of Milestone, you've never seen it in a back issue bin, you've never watched the Static Shock cartoon? Is this something they would buy? I'm still not really sure. And if it's something that they wouldn't have bought, maybe they look through it, is this something that would sell them on it? Because now you're flipping through a comic book and you've got 3 to 4 different art styles that are all really different looking. You don't have a coherent through line for the entire book. You know, you're not following one character, you're following at least 4, technically 5, technically 6 if you want to count Darius, and I really hate the fact that Darius is in it. I don't know why I don't like this kid, but God, Darius. But yeah, I'm not 100% sure this would sell super well to a new reader as opposed to an old reader who heard of Milestone or read the original Milestone and wanted more of it. To be fair, I guess if you're going to bring back a franchise that used to exist, you're going to try and sell it to the people who enjoyed it the first time and have fond memories of it. So, you know, that's the audience you're aiming for. And I think that to that audience, this would work. So I guess that's good for them. Yeah. There are a ton of writing things that I would like to critique, but this episode is getting really long and I have a whole nother story to break down, so I'm going to focus on the 2 main things that Hudlin does that super duper bother me. The first thing that I hate is that he does these really abrupt smash cuts between scenes. The opening protest leading to Virgil at the hospital works really well. I actually think that particular set of scenes makes a lot of sense. It's a very A to B type of transition. We don't really know who we're sticking with in scene A, but it immediately leads us into scene B, which answers the question of who are we reading about in scene A. Transition works well. But after Virgil wakes up, we immediately smash cut to Curtis Metcalf watching the news at Alpha Industries. But we aren't told where we are, we only learn through conversation. But why are we here? How much time has passed between the protest and this scene? Virgil clearly seems to be unconscious for some length of time, but why wouldn't Curtis have seen him on the news earlier, or on Twitter, or Facebook, or any of the other social media sources that we check these days? And if there's enough time for both the cops and for Alpha Industries to ally against Curtis, why is there no public outcry against either of these groups? I could absolutely see a class action lawsuit against the Dakota Police Force being underway or against Alpha Industries for manufacturing the gas, and then yes, those groups might want to blame this on Curtis, but we don't see any outcry being presented to us from the public itself. Similarly, once Curtis' story stops after he yells at the cops, we then smash cut to Darius, and who is Darius? Why am I supposed to care about him? I get that he's a living source of exposition, but why not show us the conditions of the hospital when we were at the hospital with Virgil? We've already been here. Why are we wasting time with this wannabe influencer? And if your idea is you want to explore the idea of somebody exploiting a tragedy through social media in order to gain fame or money, or maybe he's doing it for purely altruistic purposes, I don't know, because Darius isn't a character, he's just telling us stuff. I hate you, Darius. This brings me to my major complaint, which sounds ridiculous given how vehement I apparently am towards Darius. The overall structure of this comic. The characters that we are focused on, Virgil, Curtis, Icon and Rocket, Darius, and Holocaust, are all from extremely different walks of life. Some of their stories don't connect, except in the most broad sense that they share a universe and a publishing line, and they all kind of go off in their own directions in this. So going from Virgil to Curtis to Darius to Holocaust to Virgil to Icon and Rocket and then back to Holocaust just feels very windy and kind of unplanned. So here's the thing that I haven't done in a while. Here is what I would have done. We open the issue in school, in Virgil's class. The final bell goes off, and Frida asks Virgil if he's seen Raquel, which is the real name of Rocket, which we didn't get in this issue, but her real name is Raquel, and she is in the same class as Virgil, established in a later comic book. We could have established that here, but we didn't. Why? I don't know, because I don't think it was planned out terribly well. But Raquel skipped class. Virgil can reply no, she's been skipping class lately, hinting at her side job with Icon. But why do you ask, Frida? He asks. I wanted to invite her to the protest after school, she says, and Virgil says that, you know what? I was planning to go to that protest too. What a coincidence. Maybe we should go, together? So Frida, Virgil, Darius, and others go to the protest. They run into Frank. Frank is an a-hole. Virgil punches him, and things go south. The cops get called, gas is fired off, kids begin collapsing, Darius is streaming all of this the entire time, and he shows off one of the gas canisters that fails to go off while on stream. This then lets us cut to Curtis Metcalf, who is in his lab. He has an ongoing web search set up for certain keywords, one of which is the chemical name of that gas, and he starts to watch Darius's stream. Kids start to mutate, and his blood grows cold. They used it. How could they use it? He told them not to. It wasn't even tested. So he jumps onto the computer to start pulling up his suggestion not to use it to make an argument with his boss. But those files don't exist anymore. They've been deleted. And now Curtis can see where this is going. He leaves work, armors ops, and defends himself from the cops. Maybe they're even at a standoff for a little bit until a call goes out over the cops' line that those kids who collapsed, they're mutating. Yeah, you could actually just hold off, just have the kids just drop like they all fall unconscious, and then the chemicals take a little bit to work in their system and metabolize, and then they start mutating. This allows us to cut to the hospital, where the kids are exploding, or catching on fire, or shooting electricity out of their butts, whatever you want to do. Among them is a horrified Mrs. Hawkins, Virgil's mom, who we will later learn is a nurse, and she is holding it together and doing her best to help people when her son is brought in. Maybe she even yells at Darius about he is still streaming this coverage, and then it cuts out. This cuts us to Icon and Rocket, who are sitting in the aftermath of their drug bust. We don't even get to see it. It's just implied that these two are so badass that they took down this whole compound by themselves. They're totally calm and cool and confident, eating some tacos. Are tacos native to Colombia? I always associate tacos with Mexico, but I could be wrong. They could have more than one national origin, I suppose. Could they be eating something more unique to Colombia? Anyways, we do basically the same as what happened here with Rocket pulling out her phone. She sees the news. Maybe she's even watching Darius' stream when it gets cut off. And suggests that they need to get back, but she's reluctant until they are done here. If you want to have some action in this scene, which it's a comic book, I could see why you would, we could even have a few survivors from their attack return, and they try to fight them, and then Rocket and Icon can demonstrate their powers. But while they're fighting, Icon could say something about not taking too long because it wants to get back to Dakota before someone more dangerous can take advantage of the situation. This also helps eliminate the weird thing where Rocket, in the actual scene, goes, "We need to hurry back to Dakota!" And then when Icon goes, "Oh crap, you're right, we do!" And then she goes, "Joke, never mind, I want to eat my taco and call my mom. We'll fix those guys later." That really frustrates me. Then you end the issue on Holocaust recruiting people, if you have to have that scene, but I personally wouldn't even have it in here. I wouldn't even mention Holocaust in this issue. I would return us to Dakota and have Virgil waking up and appearing fine, but like he's tired, so his mom shoos everyone out of the room so he can rest. When she does, he would then demonstrate to the camera that he's got, magnetism/electricity powers, hinting at some kind of superpowered future. That's it. That's the end of the book. I wouldn't even touch Holocaust in this because literally it makes more sense to me that after the Big Bang, Holocaust is working behind the scenes recruiting people into his superpowered gang, which we will then go on to see in Blood Syndicate, as opposed to setting it up here and then letting it play out for 6 to 7 to 8 months. To me, what I just pitched you flows a lot smoother. After the main event, there is a 17-page preview that was originally released during one of DC's Fandome events. Fandome is a yearly event that DC does online. It's kind of their own personal convention where people can watch announcements, new trailers, and connect with comic creators, all done digitally. They started doing this in 2020 as a way of building hype during the pandemic and still keeping their staff and people safe. As before, this particular story was written by Reginald Hudland with an assist by Greg Pak and a whole bunch of artists. I'm talking Jim Lee, Ryan Benjamin, Dennis Cowan again, and Jimmy Palmiotti, Ryan Benjamin and Don Ho, Dennis Cowan again and Bill Sankiewicz, and finally Koi Pham and Scott Hanna. We've got colors by Alex Sinclair, Hi-Fi, and Chris Sotomayor. Each art team drew roughly 2 pages of this story. There are a few that did draw more, but each team changes with a shift in character. You'll see in a moment. We open with Rocket narrating this time about the night that her boyfriend encouraged her to break into the old spooky mansion in their neighborhood in Dakota. She was the only one who was small enough to fit through the doggy door and steal the good stuff. But she found more than valuables there. She ran into the owner of the mansion, and he was an alien shapeshifter. When she learned about his powers, she sold him on the pair of them becoming superheroes. Now, they're going to change the world as Rocket and Icon, starting with their neighborhood. Having been brought out of seclusion, we now jump to Icon addressing the United Nations. He introduces himself and explains that there is all manner of intelligent life in the universe besides his own. But none of them have made contact with Earth because of how primitive it is. Not technologically, though. No, because of how backwards its morality is. Across the galaxy, the most successful planets are those that work together out of love and cooperation and respect. And even now, he can hear them scoff at the very idea of love. That's how backwards Earth is. When one of your own tries to lift you up, and we're shown Jesus on the cross, you intentionally tear him down. A young woman found him, and now we see Rocket, and pleaded with him to make the changes that they themselves could not. Because she wants to get a good education. She wants her mother to go to and from work without being harassed on the street. She came to him, an alien from another planet, because humanity can't do the work themselves. That alone is an indictment of humanity's systems of education, law enforcement, economy, health, and religious beliefs. So he, remember, a superpowered alien, is going to follow the lead of a young, disenfranchised woman from a race that has been oppressed and exploited. They have no interest in ruling the Earth, he just wants to let you know. They can only hope that their actions will inspire others to do better. It's good manners to leave a place better than you found it, after all. We then find the pair at whatever passes for their base. We're not really indicated where they are, as Icon watches dozens of video feeds at once. He asks Rocket if she's heard of Static. And yeah, she has. He's copying them. They are Dakota's heroes, not him. Icon, however, doesn't share her possessiveness. Static appears to be a young man with a big heart, trying to do his best to help. Maybe she would appreciate him more if she knew a little bit more about him. We then get an even more basic look into Virgil's life than we got the first time. He's picked on by bullies, invited to the protest after school, he gets into a fight with Frank, the gas gets used, and Virgil gains superpowers, becoming Static. He narrates the few pages as well, ending with the thought that he thinks that Rocket goes to his school. Maybe she could be dating Icon, but I mean, she wouldn't, would she? No way, I mean, that would be gross. So, who knows? Maybe Static does have a shot with her. In Icon's base, Rocket folds her arms. "No, you do not," she says with a smirk, which is really creepy because he was narrating this in his head. He wasn't writing it down on paper or talking to anybody about this. Somehow, Icon's video screens are able to capture Virgil's inner thoughts. And it's a little bit creepy, and I don't think that's what's meant to be happening. I think that's just meant to be a cute scene transition, but it does not help establish what Icon is capable of. "You really think I would date a 200-year-old alien?" she starts to say, but Icon cuts her off. She shouldn't be glib. The young man faces a number of threats, including this one. The screen changes, switching to a man wearing an all-black costume. transparent red energy wings seem to be attached to his shoulders, allowing him to fly. Whoever this guy is, they seem to be hunting static. Icon says that they are bitter, they're angry. They hunt those that they think break the law, even if they don't, and he punishes them viciously. We see this bird guy drop from the sky in front of a couple of teens, a black guy and a white girl. And then things cut off, returning to Icon and Rocket. Rocket seems shaken by whatever she has just seen. "This dude is out of his mind," she says. "They've faced down some crazy things before, but this is different. He is capital C crazy, with a dose of racism tossed in." She heads for the door, intending to take care of this guy, but Icon doesn't follow. She stops in her tracks. "Come on, let's go!" But Icon has more to show her. "Oh yeah? What's crazier than what we just saw?" Icon points at the screen. This time we meet Kelly and David, a male-female couple. They're two brilliant scientists, and they've developed a nanotechnology that can heal wounds in seconds. But we're shown them kissing, and then the nanoswarm seems to engulf them, and the nanites consume Kelly. We are then given a single-page image of David wearing a gold and yellow skin-tight suit. He floats in a pink lumpy space like we're inside of a brain, and faces of Kelly bulge from the walls. David's hands are clapped over his ears. We're told that they have two hearts and minds, trapped inside of one superhuman body. Icon pauses. Rocket has stopped talking, and that's weird. Is she okay? Rocket is just thrown by all of this. She thought that meeting the alien down the street was going to be weird enough, but now all of this stuff is happening? What is going on? Why is all of this weird stuff seeming to happen at once, she asks. Now we pull away from Icon and Rocket. The Watchers are being watched through a glowing green portal. An old man with long white hair wearing robes taps his fingers together. The young lady is right. The weirdness of the world is expressing itself. This is only the beginning, he says. Much more is coming. And he, referring to himself as Dharma, will place them where they need to be in the war to come. And that's it. This particular story feels a lot rougher to me than our main story. I would guess that this preview was produced first for the Fandom event, and then the main story that we spoke about earlier was produced at a later date for physical publication. If I remember correctly, DC announced that Milestone was going to return digitally, most likely with this particular preview, and then caved to fan demand to produce an actual physical copy. Whether that was always the plan or not, I don't know. I couldn't find anything online that seemed to confirm the idea that DC was going to do only a digital release. So it is possible that they were planning a digital promo to build up hype and then a physical release later on down the line. Like I said, I couldn't find anything one way or the other. We see some ideas here that get more focus. Rocket and Icon get way more background and attention in this backup story than they did in our main story, which really felt like it was more geared towards static. We also saw no mention of Curtis Metcalf, Hardware, in this story at all, although he does appear in the final page. When we're shown Dharma, he is surrounded by other glowing green panels that feature other Milestone characters, some of which we met, many of which we haven't, most likely teasing characters to come. So Hardware gets a skip for now, but we do see a new inclusion, which is David and Kelly Kim, who go on to star in one of the second wave of modern Milestone in a comic called Duo. And, of course, we have this tease for a villain for Static. The racist, evil-looking version of Falcon, I guess? I won't lie, I have no idea who this character is, and he isn't named anything in this story, so it's a little bit hard to search for him. I'm honestly choosing to not investigate that mystery too deeply, because I'm hoping that it'll get explored later on in Static. We also get to meet the mysterious Dharma at the end, who hints at some kind of war going on or coming up. I would assume that this is some kind of massive crossover event that's going to be having everyone run around punching people, just, your standard comic thing, and they're just laying an idea for it here. It is interesting to see two different teasers for the same basic idea written by the same author. They both tease upcoming characters and events, and yet they focus on different characters, so it's just weird to me. The fact that Duo specifically got an inclusion in this preview, but doesn't show up at all in our main story, as opposed to Hardware, who showed up in our main story but barely shows up in the preview, is really weird. And then introducing this racist Falcon character for seemingly Static to fight, and then having no mention of him at all in the original story, also seems just odd. Why such huge differences between these two stories when the ultimate goal, previewing the Milestone universe, is the same? And especially when the main event really spent a lot of its time building up the threat of Holocaust, who I know is meant to go on to be a character in the Blood Syndicate storyline, but then what happened to this racist guy? He just drops off the face of the map? Is he going to appear in Static at some point? I don't know. I want to know. My interest is piqued, which is always the point of a preview like this, but not knowing where it's going is really a little bit frustrating. This story does get to see some artwork by Jim Lee, whose artwork is always amazing, but he also doesn't go on to do anything with producing the actual Milestone comics, so I do think that he's a bit of an odd fit here. It's not like we're going to see him featuring on Static or Hardware or Rocket and Icon, which would be great, but he doesn't. His 2 pages here do look amazing, but it feels almost more of just a tease than it feels like something to be excited for. If I read this promo and I was like, Jim Lee is going to be drawing Milestone? He's probably only going to draw 2 issues and then drop out to go do something else, because that's generally what Jim Lee does. And I would be excited for it, but if I then moved on and read Rocket and Icon and Jim Lee wasn't there, I would be really let down. For $5 though, this is a really good bit of comic book. You do get 2 different stories, so it's nice that they're not exactly the same, even if it is frustrating that they don't kind of present you with the same end goal, really. Especially when you've got this set up for Dharma and what I'm assuming is a company-wide crossover, but then there's no mention or introduction of Dharma in the main event either. Is there a crossover coming? Was it planned but then scrapped? If it was scrapped, why include the preview? There's just a lot of background questions that I'm kind of left with that I don't feel like I'm going to get a good answer for. Thankfully, we will be getting answers to a lot of other things, because next time I will be breezing my way through issues 1 through 6 of Milestone's most recognizable character, Static. These few episodes are going to be a little bit looser than this particular one. I'm just planning to reread the comics, and then I'm just going to talk about them. You're not going to get an in-depth 8-week-long look at these Static books. I don't want to be here forever, and the books are due, and I kind of want to get to all of the Milestone books, so I'm hoping to do this for all of them relatively quickly. My idea here is more to give you folks an idea of, do these books work for someone who's never read them before, and are they entertaining enough that I think somebody should go pick them up? We'll get to see Static learn about his powers, get his first supersuit, get into a whole bunch of trouble while he battles governmental corruption and bullying in next week's episode of Comic Book Breakdown, episode 22.2, Starting Static. Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me, to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.